one day, El Macho made a fatal error that would cost him dearly, that being the brutal murder of El Chapo's son, an action that would ultimately seal his fate. Before we venture into the twisted web surrounding the gruesome murder of El Chapo's son, we must first unravel the enigma that is El Macho. Born into crime. August 17, 1971, Insunza was born in the heart of the Mexican drug trade, Culiacan, Sinaloa. His life was steeped in darkness from the very beginning, as he was the son of a drug dealer named Rene Insunza. For many, the illicit trade was a way of life, affording a modicum of wealth and a few luxuries. But for Insunza, it was destiny. Tragedy struck early in his life when his father passed away, plunging Insunza into a spiral of despair and destruction from which he would never fully emerge. At just 19 years old, he committed his first murder, brazenly gunning down a man in front of horrified witnesses at a local party. He fled the scene and moved to the state of Sonora, leaving the authorities and his former friends behind. But murder was just the beginning for Insunza. He soon became embroiled in the seedy underbelly of organized crime, trafficking drugs, and committing unspeakable acts of violence without a second thought. When one of his associates stole from him, Insunza went to extreme lengths to exact revenge, hunting him down with a group of gunmen at a children's party. But his target, Jesus Rene Delgado Meza, managed to slip away, and Insunza's thirst for vengeance only grew stronger. It was then that he caught the attention of Ismael Zambada Garcia, better known as El Mayo, a name that rang bells in the violent, unstable world of drug trafficking. Zambada saw potential in Insunza's thirst for vengeance and blood, and in a meeting that would change the course of Insunza's life, El Mayo made him an offer he couldn't refuse: to join the ranks of the most powerful cartel in the country, the Sinaloa Cartel. From vengeance to Sinaloa Cartel assassin. Deep in the shadows of Mexico's criminal underworld, a dark force rose to power in the 1980s. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, known as El Padrino, ruled over the Guadalajara cartel with an iron fist, controlling the flow of drugs from Mexico to the US. But when DEA agent Kiki Camarena was brutally murdered and kidnapped, the Guadalajara cartel was ripped apart. From the ashes emerged two factions, the Tijuana cartel and the Sinaloa cartel. It was here that the notorious figures like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Mario El Mayo Zambada came to power. Despite popular belief, El Mayo is believed by many to be the true mastermind behind the trafficking empire. The U.S. State Department reported that Zambada orchestrated an operation that smuggled white powder from Colombia to Mexico via boats and possibly submarines, then used cars, trucks, and planes to transport it to major U.S. cities. The Sinaloa cartel's dominance surged in the 1990s, fueled by their masterful skill in forging cunning alliances and executing shrewd coordination tactics. El Mayo and El Chapo reigned over this vast criminal empire with a tenacious grip, controlling the intricate smuggling network that spanned across multiple states and cities, including Arizona, California, Chicago, and New York. The Sinaloa cartel reached the top of the underworld's ladder by being one of the world's most notorious and powerful drug trafficking organizations with a chilling reputation for violence. The cartel has been accused of killing innocent women and children, sexually assaulting the family members of rivals, and even dissolving the remains of his victims in vats of acid. It was in this ominous and dangerous world that El Macho found his perfect place, fueled by his violent and sadistic urges. Zambada was always on the lookout for young, dangerous enforcers to bolster his criminal empire, and when he laid eyes on El Macho, he knew he had found someone special. Soon, the ruthless gunslinger was promoted to become Zambada's chief of assassins, unleashing his reign of terror across Culiacan and beyond. El Macho wasted no time growing a notorious reputation. He was a cold-blooded killer who showed no mercy to those who crossed him. The Mexican authorities suspect that he was behind more than 80 murders during his time in Sinaloa, including the brutal executions of at least a dozen police officers. Despite the many attempts to put him behind bars, El Macho always seemed to evade justice and maintain his grip on power. One time, when two patrol cars from the Federal Ministerial Police entered his territory to make an arrest, El Macho's gunmen quickly arrived on the scene. They forced the officers to call their boss. When he arrived, El Macho physically assaulted the police commander and confiscated all their weapons, declaring his territory off limits to any law enforcement presence. El Macho's notoriety only grew after a deadly shootout in 2002, when the Federal Preventive Police intercepted a convoy of gunmen that included El Macho himself. The resulting gun battle claimed the lives of 4 police officers and one of El Macho's henchmen, but the drug lord managed to slip away from the scene. Even in 2005, when El Macho was finally apprehended along with his 8 men by the Mazatlan Municipal Police, even with evidence of a cache of weapons in his possession, El Macho managed to bribe his way out of prison. But for El Macho, such risks and dangers were all part of the job. He thrived on top of the violent world of retribution and brutality, and his loyal gang of cutthroats would stop at nothing to protect their boss. With El Macho's expertise and ferocity, the Sinaloa Cartel managed to dominate vast territories and distribute more drugs than any other criminal organization on the planet. But despite his reign of terror, one fateful mistake was all it took to bring the mighty El Macho to his knees. A throne shattered overnight. May 8, 2008. Darkness had already descended upon a shopping center parking lot as 3 young men gathered to wait for their friend. Among them was Edgar Guzman Lopez, the son of infamous Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a convoy of 5 vans screeched to a halt, and over 20 men with armed long weapons and bulletproof vests emerged. With a deafening bang, a sign on the upper wall of the mall burst into flames after being hit by an explosive shot from a bazooka. The gunmen that were here clearly meant business. Witnesses reported at least 500 AK-47 shots fired, causing a wave of panic. And after a long hail of gunfire, the 3 young men lay dead, their lives extinguished in an instant. To this day, there are conflicting reports on the motive behind the massacre, as 2 versions of the story exist. Around that time, a deadly game of power and revenge was being played out between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Beltran Leyva Cartel. The capture of Alfredo Beltran Leyva by the Mexican Army in January 2008 had sent shockwaves through the criminal organization, and suspicion fell on El Chapo as the one who betrayed him. The Beltran Leyva brothers, Arturo, Carlos, and Hector, were out for blood, and blood they got as El Chapo's son was killed in the brutal attack. However, some reports suggest that the hitmen were led by none other than El Macho Prieto. But what could have possibly made El Macho commit such an unforgivable mistake and kill the son of his own boss? Rumors abound that El Chapo had ordered the execution of a young man nicknamed El Gacho, who was also present at the same shopping center that night. But because of the darkness of this place, the hitmen under the command of El Macho made a grave error and ended up taking the life of El Chapo's son, turning it into a catastrophic case of mistaken identity. And so, with one mistake, El Macho Prieto's thriving criminal career came to a sudden and brutal halt. The consequences of that night would haunt him for the rest of his days. The Reckoning. Now, what happened complicated the relationship between El Mayo and his faithful enforcer, and so El Macho was left without protection. He was transferred by the top echelons of the Sinaloa Cartel to the states of Baja California and Sonora. He settled down in Sonora, and from there, he coordinated drug trafficking activities across multiple states. 2011, El Macho's past sins caught up with him as he found himself on the run from a vengeful Manuel Torres Felix, a key figure and major drug trafficker for El Mayo and El Chapo. Felix was furious at El Macho for committing an unapproved murder. El Macho knew that he had to flee for his life and quickly relocated from Sonora to Baja California. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted and watched, and the thought of Torres Felix's wrath constantly loomed over him like a dark cloud. However, Felix was killed in a 2012 shootout with soldiers in a lucky turn of events. El Macho's criminal empire continued to grow, bringing him immense wealth and power. But his success was built upon a foundation of violence, greed, and betrayal. He controlled a massive car theft ring on both sides of the border, and his drug operations spanned multiple cities along the Pacific coast. But his rise to the top had come at the cost of countless lives, as he ruthlessly pushed out fellow Sinaloa Cartel members. His erratic and violent behavior also hadn't gone unnoticed. He drew attention to himself with needless acts of brutality, like executing a well-known real estate agent who he blamed for a raid on his safe house. He thought nothing of getting into minor scuffles that would end with him shooting innocent bystanders in broad daylight. But despite the numerous complaints from lieutenants and government officials on the payroll, El Macho continued to thrive. However, his luck would soon run out. The shadows were closing in on him, and a reckoning was coming. The final showdown. The countdown had begun, and El Macho's fate was sealed. The war chief's erratic behavior had spiraled out of control, and he was now a problem that needed to be eliminated. Zambada knew it was time to take action against his former enforcer, but it wouldn't be an easy task. El Macho's success in battling other crime groups was thanks to his use of former Special Forces soldiers that formed most of his hit squads. Zambada's solution was to drop a dime on El Macho's location to the government. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. December 18, 2013. A special task force made up of Marines and federal police raced towards the city where El Macho was held up in a villa. They knew he was returning to Puerto Penasco in a 3 SUV convoy, and unconfirmed sources say the convoy was also being tracked in real time by American aircraft. The mission was set in motion, and the stage was now set for the ultimate showdown. But El Macho wasn't going down without a fight. When his convoy ran into a surprise blockade on the coastal highway, his bodyguards immediately opened fire on the Marines and federal agents. Chaos erupted as the sound of gunfire filled the air. A pair of gunmen tried to shoot down a hovering helicopter, but they never stood a chance. It was now just El Macho and a few bodyguards left, held up inside his villa nearby. An intense shootout was now roaring right in the middle of a huge hotel/villa complex. Terrified residents scrambled to windows, confused as to what's happening. El Macho was also scrambling to get reinforcements so he could escape. So far, they were able to keep the agents at bay. Every time the Marines and agents tried to get close, they were met with a burst of fully automatic fire, a .50 caliber rifle, and grenades. The shootout went on for 3 hours, with both sides exchanging heavy fire. El Macho demanded the walkie-talkie from one of his gunmen, pleading for backup. But it was too late. A Marine managed to hit El Macho from a nearby window overlooking his position, and he slumped down, mortally wounded. His gunmen were able to open up an escape route, but El Macho didn't make it out alive. His loyal henchmen, now his only mourners, carried his lifeless body back to his home turf as a last act of devotion. Authorities later confirmed El Macho's death by taking samples of his blood found in a walkway where he'd been shot. It was a match. El Macho had played the role of the bloodthirsty gangster, always on the attack or defending his turf, always ordering executions, always in the middle of a war. But his undoing was his mistaken assumption that he was above the well-oiled machine that was bringing in billions in profit every year. In the end, it wasn't a rival cartel that killed him, but his own boss who participated in his demise. El Macho's death was a reminder that in the world of cartels, no one's untouchable.